Hello, and welcome to Music and Art in the Catholic Tradition. Module 1, Lesson 2. Today we're going to be talking about Aristotle's Politics and how that work exhibits similarities and differences from the perspective given by Plato in his Republic. So let's start by defining what music is to Aristotle. In Book 8, Section 7, Aristotle says that music is produced by melody and rhythm. And so right away we can see that he agrees with Plato insofar as dividing music into pitches and their motion in time. That is, rhythm. Now you'll notice that Aristotle does not mention words, and yet Plato says that music, or a song, is words, melody, and rhythm. And then he goes on and he says in a previous passage that literature is included in music. So there's a more intimate connection between words and music for Plato than there is for Aristotle. But that's not to say, of course, like I said last time, that Plato would deny that instrumental music, purely melody and rhythm music, exists. He would acknowledge that. But music with words is more important to him. He spends more time talking about it, whereas Aristotle doesn't really spend much time talking about words at all. He's just focused on music itself, just the melody and the rhythm and what that does to us and, what the implications are for the perfect society. And of course, the Republic and the Politics are both talking about the same thing, right? They're both focused on politics. They're both focused on the state and society and what's good and what's bad for that from Plato and Aristotle's perspectives. Aristotle also says that music is an imitation of emotions or characters when he writes, "When men hear imitations, even apart from the rhythms and tunes themselves, their feelings move in sympathy. Rhythm and melody supply imitations of anger and gentleness, and also of courage and temperance, and of all the qualities contrary to these, and of the other qualities of character, which hardly fall short of the actual affections, as we know from our own experience. For in listening to such strains, our souls undergo a change." So Aristotle is saying music is a collection of pitches in time, and that they, in given combinations, represent or imitate, or share a similar resonating frequency, if you want to look at it from a sort of quasi-scientific perspective, with not just emotions like anger or sadness, but also with characters like gentleness or temperance or courage, which we wouldn't really say are emotions. Because it imitates these, it can have an effect on us. So that's what music is. What does music do to us? Well, he's already said that when we listen to these imitations, our soul undergoes a change. And that is because there seems to be in us, as he writes, a sort of affinity to musical modes and rhythms, which make some philosophers say that the soul is a tuning, others that it possesses tuning. And this is the end of part 5 where he writes this. And so what he's saying is the reason why we resonate with music, the reason why it can affect us, is because our soul either is itself music, itself a sort of pitch. That pitch wants to resonate sympathetically with the other pitches that it hears outside in the world. In the same way that, and this is something that the Greeks knew about at the time, if you tune one string to a given pitch, let's say A 440, and then you tune another string to the same pitch, and then you pluck the first one and don't touch the second one, and as long as the second one is not impeded and it's allowed to vibrate freely, then the second string will vibrate sympathetically with the first one because they're in tune with each other. Even though you haven't struck it, it will still vibrate. It will still produce a sound. As I said, the Greeks knew about this at the time, And they thought it was completely magical. And it really sort of is, if you think about it. And so they're just extrapolating that thing that they saw in the real world as an explanation for why music makes us feel different, makes us change our emotions, makes us happy or sad when we listen to it. Because our soul is, you could think of it as a string, which is what he's saying when he says that it possesses tuning. So it's not a pitch itself, but it has a fundamental frequency. Or it's actually music itself, and it seeks to be in sympathetic vibration with the music that it is in the outside world. And so it adjusts its pitch until it is in sympathy with the music that's coming from the outside world. So we've established that, like Plato, Aristotle believes that music is a collection of pitches and rhythms that imitate emotions and characters, and that imitation has an influence on us. It can change the way we feel. It can make us good, or it can make us bad. It can make us happy, or it can make us sad, based on what collection of pitches are being performed and how they're being performed, because that's what the rhythm is, how the pitches are being presented. Now let's talk about what Aristotle sees as music's use, both how people use it and how it should be used. So in part 3, he starts talking about this, and he says that people use music as a source of pleasure, as a source of amusement. He writes, "In our own day, most men cultivate it for the sake of pleasure, but originally it was included in education because nature herself, as has been often said, requires that we should be able not only to work well, but to use leisure well. For as I must repeat once again, the first principle of all action is leisure. Both are required, but leisure is better than occupation and is its end, and therefore the question must be asked, what ought we to do when at leisure? Clearly we ought not to amuse ourselves, for then amusement would be the end of life." So, amusement and leisure. Amusement, to Aristotle, is just a temporary enjoyment, whereas leisure is sort of the when you come to the state of rest, when you are at rest, when you are at peace, and you are able to just enjoy life. We could think of leisure here as the good life, eudaimonia, as Aristotle would say. So, when we reach this goal of life, which is eudaimonia, which is the good life, which is leisure, then that is the end of our life, basically. That is the goal that we're seeking. And one of the ways we can engage in leisure, one of the ways we can use our leisure well, is by using music, by enjoying music. He goes on to say, It's clear then that there are branches of learning and education which we must study merely with a view to leisure spent in intellectual activity, and these are to be valued for their own sake, whereas those kinds of knowledge which are useful in business are to be necessary and exist for the sake of other things. So, music is something we can use or should use in our leisure time, and it's an intrinsic good. It's good simply because of its own value. There remains then the use of music for intellectual enjoyment and leisure. So that's one of the possible uses for music. But he goes on to mention two others. He says, "It's not easy to determine the nature of music, or why any one should have a knowledge of it, shall we say, for the sake of amusement and relaxation, like sleep or drinking? Or shall we argue that music conduces to virtue, on the grounds that it can form our minds and habituate us to true pleasures, as our bodies are made by gymnastics to be of a certain character? Or shall we say that it contributes to the enjoyment of leisure and mental cultivation, which is a third alternative?" So you'll notice that he mentions pleasure and leisure, or pleasure and amusement, which he says is the way most people use it now. He says, should we use it to conduce virtue? Should we use it to make ourselves virtuous and therefore use it in education? Or should we use it for mental cultivation and leisure? And then he goes on to say, it takes him a while to get to any point because he's using this dialectic style which requires that you ask questions and then you explain how you could possibly answer them. So it takes him a while to get to his answer for that. But eventually he writes that we maintain further that music should be studied not for the sake of one but of many benefits, that is to say, with a view to education, perjuration, and he means catharsis here, and that it can serve for enjoyment, for relaxation, and for recreation after exertion. It is clear, therefore, that all modes must be employed by us, but not all of them in the same manner. So this is the heart of what Aristotle thinks music should be used for. He says basically that you can use it for anything. You can use it for education because it's undeniable that music has an effect on us and that it can make us virtuous or vicious, just like Plato says. He says you can use it for perjuration or catharsis, which is something that Plato doesn't mention, but which is a very important thing for Aristotle. He mentions it a number of times. He mentions it in his Poetics especially. And that is, of course, the idea that when you engage in an activity that brings out an emotion in you, and even a negative emotion, then that act of bringing it out purges it from you, and then you're freed of it, you're relieved of it. It's sort of a medical perspective, sort of a psychiatric perspective on art. So you watch a play that's sad, a drama, and that sadness, the crying that you experience, that purges it from your body and you feel better afterwards. If you listen to music that is sort of angry and frenzied, then you get that frenzied anger out of you, and it's not going to be a problem anymore for you. So Aristotle believes, therefore, and he even says, I should mention, that you can use it for enjoyment, which is something that Plato may agree with, but he never mentions it in the Republic, so it's not important for him. And so Aristotle says, okay, all types of music, any mode. He even says, the Socrates of the Republic is wrong in retaining only the Phrygian mode along with the Dorian, and the more so because he rejects the flute, for the Phrygian is to the mode what the flute is to musical instruments. Both of them are exciting and emotional. So he even says, Plato's Republic is wrong in that some modes should not be used and others should. Some modes should be banned and others should be used only. Aristotle says you can use any mode, but it has to be for the right thing. It has to be at the appropriate time to do one of these things, to educate, to purge, or for enjoyment. And that's really the big difference between Aristotle and Plato. Aristotle is more accepting and Plato is more restricting. And you'll notice, though, that on the fundamental points they agree completely. And so this is really the big debate that continues from this point in the 4th century BCE all the way up into about the 19th century, when people stopped caring so much about Plato and Aristotle. And that is, should we ban certain types of music, or should we use all of them at their appropriate time? Do they have an appropriate time? And we might also mention that we haven't really talked a lot about aesthetics today, but though we read the Poetics, we would see that Aristotle's idea of aesthetics is very similar to Plato's. Things must be fitting. Things must be realistic. Things must be gracefully simplistic and representative of whatever it is they're trying to represent. So having gone a little bit over time yet again, that is lesson 2. Let me know if you have any questions about anything we've covered in here. Have a good day wherever you are. See you next time.